The crack of thunder shook the small house as Florence Hayes pulled her quilt tighter around her shoulders, watching with mounting dread as the rainwater seeped through the already damaged ceiling above her bed. It was 1878 in Independence, Missouri, and the spring storms had been relentless, battering her modest homestead for 3 days straight. Florence, 23 and alone since her father's passing last winter, had been fighting to maintain the property, but tonight's downpour was proving to be the fiercest challenge yet. The creaking above grew louder, drowning out even the howling wind. Florence scrambled from her bed just as the first wooden beam gave way with a sickening snap. She barely made it to the bedroom doorway before her entire ceiling collapsed in a thunderous crash of timber, mud, and water. Trembling in her nightdress, Florence stared at the destruction. Her bed was crushed beneath heavy beams and debris, rain pouring freely into her home. Her father's pocket watch and her mother's locket, the only keepsakes she had of them, were somewhere in that rubble, but retrieving them now was impossible. With tears blending with rainwater on her cheeks, Florence grabbed her woolen shawl and rushed out into the storm. The nearest neighbor was the Cowley ranch, over a mile away. She'd only met Adam Cowley twice since he'd purchased the adjacent property 6 months ago. People in town spoke well of the quiet, hard-working cowboy who kept mostly to himself, though Florence had barely exchanged more than pleasantries with him. By the time she reached his cabin, her nightdress was plastered to her skin, her dark hair hanging in sodden ropes around her pale face. Her bare feet were cut and bleeding from the rocky path. She pounded on his door with the last of her strength. When the door swung open, Florence found herself looking up into the concerned gray eyes of Adam Cowley. At 28, he stood tall and broad-shouldered in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to alarm as he took in her bedraggled appearance. "Miss Hayes, good heavens, what's happened?" He ushered her inside, quickly grabbing a blanket from a nearby chair and wrapping it around her shoulders. Between chattering teeth, Florence explained about the roof collapse. Adam stoked the fire in his small stone fireplace, bringing the cabin's warmth up as he listened. "You'll sleep safe in my cabin tonight," he said firmly once she'd finished. "And tomorrow we'll see what can be salvaged from your place." His voice was gentle but left no room for argument. "I'll make you some coffee to warm you up." Florence nodded gratefully, clutching the blanket tighter. "I'm sorry to impose like this, Mr. Cowley." "Adam," he corrected, setting a pot on the stove. "And there's no imposition. Neighbors help neighbors out here, that's how we all survive." Florence took in the simple but well-kept cabin, a far cry from the rough bachelor quarters she'd expected. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with volumes of history and literature. Hand-carved furniture gave the place a homey feel, and everything was meticulously organized. Adam handed her a steaming cup. "I'll sleep by the fire, you take the bed." "I couldn't possibly, please," he insisted. "You've had enough hardship tonight." Too exhausted to argue further, Florence accepted his kindness. The smell of coffee and wood smoke surrounded her as the storm continued to rage outside, but for the first time that night, she felt safe. Morning brought clearer skies and the awkwardness of finding herself in a stranger's home. Florence woke to the sound of cooking and the aroma of bacon. She found Adam at his stove, his sleeves rolled up as he prepared breakfast. "Good morning," he said, nodding toward the table. "I hope you slept well, considering." "Better than I would have under a collapsed roof," she replied with a small smile. "Thank you, Mr. Cowley." "Adam, I don't know what I would have done without your help." He placed a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Eat first, then we'll ride over and assess the damage." Florence glanced down at her nightdress, now dried but still her only clothing. Reading her thoughts, Adam disappeared into his room and returned with a folded shirt and trousers. "My late sister's," he explained. "She was about your size." "They're clean, I've kept her things." A flash of pain crossed his features before he turned away. "I'll wait outside while you change." An hour later, they rode toward Florence's homestead on Adam's 2 horses. In daylight, with the storm past, Florence could see the full extent of Adam's property for the first time: well-maintained fences, healthy cattle grazing in the distance, and a small but impressive barn. He clearly worked hard and knew what he was doing. When they reached Florence's home, her heart sank. The damage was even worse than she'd feared. Not only had her bedroom ceiling collapsed, but the structural integrity of the entire back section was compromised. Water had soaked through much of her bedding, clothing, and the few books she owned. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, staring at the wreckage. Adam examined the beams, testing the remaining structure with practiced hands. "This would take substantial work to repair," he said honestly. "The foundations shifted too. Has this happened before?" Florence nodded reluctantly. "My father patched it twice. The house was already old when we moved here 5 years ago." Adam's expression grew thoughtful. "Let's salvage what we can today. You're welcome to stay at my place until we figure something out." Together they worked through the morning, retrieving her father's watch and mother's locket from the debris, miraculously undamaged, along with clothes, kitchenware, and family photographs. By midday, they'd loaded the essential items into Adam's wagon. As they worked side by side, Florence learned more about the quiet cowboy. He'd come to independence after years of driving cattle across Texas and Kansas. When his sister died of consumption 2 years prior, he decided to put down roots, using his savings to buy the small ranch. "She always wanted a place of her own," he explained as they carefully wrapped Florence's dishes. "Somewhere stable. I guess I'm living that dream for her now." "I'm sorry about your sister," Florence said softly. Adam nodded, his eyes distant. "Lily was all the family I had after our parents passed. What about you? Any family besides your father?" Florence shook her head. "My mother died when I was 16. My father brought us west from Pennsylvania to start fresh. He worked himself too hard, though." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "His heart gave out last December." They continued working in companionable silence. Florence found herself studying Adam when he wasn't looking, the careful way he handled her belongings, the strength in his movements, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. By evening, they had rescued everything of value, and Adam insisted Florence return with him to his cabin. "At least until we can make other arrangements," he said, helping her onto his horse. That night, after another simple but delicious meal cooked by Adam, Florence sat by his fire, mending one of her salvaged dresses. "You cook well for a bachelor," she observed. Adam smiled, the firelight catching in his eyes. "Trail cooking teaches a man to be resourceful, can't survive on beans and hardtack forever." "My father could barely boil water," Florence laughed. "I had to learn everything from books and neighbors." "Yet you managed that homestead by yourself these past months," Adam said, respect evident in his voice. "That's no small feat for anyone, let alone." "A woman alone," Florence finished, raising an eyebrow. Adam looked embarrassed. "I meant no offense." "None taken," she assured him. "But you're right, it hasn't been easy." She set down her mending with a sigh. "I've been barely keeping up with the essential repairs. This roof collapse was just the final straw." "What will you do now?" Adam asked quietly. Florence had been pondering this same question all day. "I could sell the land, move into town, perhaps find work as a seamstress or schoolteacher." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "You have options." "Do I?" Florence challenged gently. "A woman alone has few true options in this world, Mr. Cowley." "Adam," he corrected again, then fell silent, turning his attention to cleaning his revolver, a nightly ritual Florence had noticed. The next morning, Florence woke to the sound of voices outside. Pulling on her borrowed clothes, she emerged to find Adam speaking with 3 men on horseback. She recognized them as neighbors from further up the valley. "Miss Hayes," the oldest man, Mr. Peterson, tipped his hat. "Heard about your trouble. Adam here has been telling us about your collapsed roof." "Word travels fast," Florence said, self-consciously adjusting her borrowed shirt. "We came to offer help," said another man, whom Florence knew as Thomas Bailey. "Adam says the structure needs significant work." "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly. We help each other out here," Mr. Peterson interrupted, echoing Adam's words from that first night. "My boys and I will come tomorrow to assess what needs doing." After the men departed, Florence turned to Adam. "You arranged this," he shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable. "I merely mentioned your situation," they offered freely. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Touched by his thoughtfulness over the next week, a routine developed. During the days, Florence would accompany Adam to her homestead, where neighbors came to help with repairs. The men worked on the structural elements while Florence, along with Mrs. Peterson and other women from nearby farms, cleaned, organized, and prepared meals for the workers. In the evenings, Florence and Adam would return to his cabin, sharing the domestic duties. She insisted on cooking to repay his hospitality, though he never let her feel like a burden. They would spend hours talking by the fire about books they'd read, places they'd been, dreams they harbored. Florence found herself increasingly drawn to Adam's quiet strength and gentle manner. He treated her not as a helpless woman, but as an equal partner in solving her predicament. For his part, Adam seemed to appreciate her resilience and determined spirit. One evening, as they sat companionably by the fire, Adam cleared his throat. "I've been thinking about your situation." Florence looked up from her sewing. "Oh. The repairs on your house are progressing, but Mr. Peterson confirms what I suspected. The foundation issues mean you'll likely face similar problems next spring." Florence sighed. "I feared as much." "I have a proposition," Adam continued, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "My land adjoins yours. I've been wanting to expand my herd but haven't had the acreage." "Are you offering to buy my land?" Florence asked, trying to hide her disappointment at the thought of leaving the area completely. "Not exactly." Adam set aside the bridle he'd been mending. "I'm suggesting a partnership." Florence stared at him. "What kind of partnership?" "Your land combined with mine would make a viable ranch. I have the knowledge and the cattle, you have additional acreage. Together we could build something worthwhile." He hesitated. "You could continue living in your house once it's repaired, of course, but we would work the combined property together." "As business partners?" Florence clarified, her heart beating faster. Adam nodded, though something in his expression suggested he might be considering more. "For now. We both benefit. You keep your land and gain income from the cattle. I expand my operation." Florence considered his proposal. It was unconventional but practical. More importantly, it would allow her to stay on her father's land while giving her financial security. "I accept," she said finally. "But I want to learn everything cattle raising, business management. I won't be a silent partner." Adam's face broke into a genuine smile. "I wouldn't expect anything less." The next day, they rode out together to survey the combined properties. Adam pointed out where additional fencing would be needed, where the best grazing areas were located, and how many more cattle he planned to purchase. "We'll need to build a proper barn on your property," he said, pointing to a level area near her house. "The existing structure is too small." Florence listened attentively, asking questions and offering suggestions. When Adam mentioned the creek that ran through both properties, Florence suggested damming a section to create a more reliable water source for the cattle during dry months. "That's actually a very good idea," Adam admitted, looking at her with new respect. "I read extensively about farming improvements," Florence explained. "My father subscribed to agricultural journals." By the time they returned to Adam's cabin that evening, they had sketched out plans for the first 6 months of their partnership. The excitement of building something together had brought a new energy to both of them. As weeks passed, Florence's house repairs progressed, though more slowly than anticipated due to difficulties getting certain materials from town. She continued staying at Adam's cabin, their initial awkwardness giving way to comfortable domesticity. One evening, a severe thunderstorm hit the area, bringing back painful memories of the night her roof collapsed. Florence sat rigid by the fire, flinching at each thunderclap. Adam noticed her distress. "The repairs at your place are sound," he assured her. "The new roof will hold." I know, Florence said, trying to smile. It's just, I keep seeing it all happening again. Adam hesitated, then moved to sit beside her on the small sofa. After my first cattle drive, I couldn't sleep during storms either, he confessed. We lost 3 men when a lightning strike spooked the herd into a ravine. For years, thunder brought those memories back. How did you overcome it? Florence asked softly. Time, he answered honestly, and eventually having someone to talk to about it. He tentatively placed his hand over hers. You're safe here, Florence. The simple touch and the rare use of her first name calmed her more than words could express. When a particularly loud crash of thunder shook the cabin, Florence instinctively turned toward Adam, who wrapped a protective arm around her shoulders. They remained that way until the storm passed, neither acknowledging the growing feelings between them, but both deeply aware of the shift in their relationship. The next morning brought clear skies and news from town. Mr. Peterson arrived early, bringing mail and supplies. Telegram for you, Adam, he said, handing over a yellow envelope. Came in yesterday. Adam read the message, his expression darkening. Bad news, Florence asked when Mr. Peterson had departed. Cattle prices in Kansas City have dropped significantly, Adam explained. I was counting on better rates for our expanded herd. Florence processed this information. Our partnership is still sound, she said firmly. We'll adjust our plans. Adam looked at her gratefully. I've been thinking, he said after a moment. Rather than rushing to expand, we should focus on breeding quality stock. It takes longer but brings better returns. They spent the morning revising their business strategy, with Florence suggesting they diversify by adding a small orchard on the fertile land near the creek, something that could provide additional income while the cattle operation grew. That afternoon, they rode into Independence together to order seeds and additional supplies. Florence was acutely aware of the curious glances from townsfolk, undoubtedly wondering about her living arrangement with the bachelor rancher, Mrs. Thornton, the dressmaker and town gossip, approached them outside the general store. Florence, dear, we've been so worried about you since hearing of your misfortune. I'm quite well, thank you, Florence replied politely. The community has been very supportive, Mrs. Thornton's eyes darted between Florence and Adam. And Mr. Cowley has been accommodating, I understand. Before Florence could respond, Adam stepped forward. Miss Hayes and I have formed a business partnership, he stated clearly. We're combining our properties to create a larger ranch operation. How progressive, Mrs. Thornton said with raised eyebrows. And your living arrangements during this partnership? Florence felt her cheeks burn but lifted her chin. Mr. Cowley has kindly provided shelter while my home undergoes repairs. I see. Mrs. Thornton's tone suggested she saw far more than was proper. Well, I do hope you'll both attend the Founders' Day dance next Saturday. The whole town will be there. After she moved on, Florence sighed heavily. I'm sorry, I should have anticipated the gossip. Adam's jaw was tight. You've done nothing wrong. Neither have you, Florence pointed out, but people will talk regardless. Adam was quiet for a moment. Would you like to attend the dance? He finally asked. Together, I mean. Florence looked at him in surprise. You don't strike me as a dancing man, Adam Cowley. A small smile tugged at his lips. I have hidden talents, Miss Hayes. The Founders' Day dance transformed the town hall into a festive gathering place, with lanterns strung across the ceiling and tables laden with food contributed by local families. Florence wore her best dress, a blue gown that had mercifully been stored in a trunk that escaped water damage. Adam, dressed in a clean white shirt and black vest, looked so handsome that Florence felt a flutter in her chest when he offered his arm to escort her inside. His usually tousled brown hair was neatly combed, and he'd trimmed his beard for the occasion. As they entered, conversations momentarily paused before resuming with increased animation. Florence held her head high, determined not to let gossip ruin the evening. True to his word, Adam proved to be a competent dancer, guiding Florence confidently through several sets. During a particularly lively reel, Florence caught glimpses of genuine joy on his usually serious face. "You've been hiding your dancing abilities," she teased when they paused for refreshments. "My mother insisted I learn," he admitted. Said no son of hers would be a clumsy ox at social gatherings. "She taught you well," Florence said, accepting the cup of punch he offered. As the evening progressed, other men asked Florence to dance. She accepted politely, though she found herself constantly aware of Adam's position in the room, his eyes following her movements. During a slower waltz, Florence found herself back in Adam's arms, the familiar scent of his soap and leather comforting after the various colognes of her previous partners. "People are still watching us," she murmured, noticing Mrs. Thornton whispering to a group of ladies. "Let them watch," Adam replied, his hand warm against her back. "I'm more concerned with what you think than the entire town of Independence combined." Florence looked up at him, surprised by the intensity in his gray eyes. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, the music ended, and the mayor called for everyone's attention to make announcements about upcoming town events. The walk home under the stars was quiet, both of them lost in thought. When they reached Adam's cabin, he built up the fire while Florence made tea. "You never answered my question," she said finally, handing him a steaming cup. "About what you meant at the dance." Adam stared into the fire. "Florence, these past weeks." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Having you here has made this cabin feel like a home for the first time." Florence's heart quickened. "Adam, please let me finish," he said gently. "Our partnership makes sense on paper. Your land, my cattle, it's a sound business arrangement, but I find myself wanting more than that." He set down his cup and turned to face her fully. "I care for you, Florence. More than I thought possible after losing Lily. The thought of you returning to your house, of this cabin being empty again." He shook his head. "I don't want our partnership to be just about business." Florence stepped closer to him. "What do you want it to be?" "I want it to be a true partnership, in every sense." His voice grew softer. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming my wife." Florence's breath caught. She'd known her feelings for Adam had been growing, but hearing him speak so plainly still caught her by surprise. "This isn't just because of convenience or the gossip in town?" she asked, needing to be certain. "No," Adam said firmly. "Though I won't deny that making our arrangement official would silence the talk, but that's not why I'm asking." He took her hand. "I'm asking because the thought of waking up without seeing your face across the breakfast table leaves me cold. Because working beside you these past weeks has brought me a joy I'd forgotten could exist." Tears welled in Florence's eyes. "When my roof collapsed, I thought I'd lost everything," she whispered. "I never imagined it would lead me to something so much more valuable." "Is that a yes?" Adam asked, hope evident in his voice. In answer, Florence stepped forward and kissed him softly on the lips. When she pulled back, Adam's stunned expression made her laugh. "Yes, Adam Cowley, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in the small church in Independence, with many of the neighbors who had helped repair Florence's house in attendance. Even Mrs. Thornton seemed genuinely happy for them, though she couldn't resist mentioning how she'd known all along that something was blossoming between them. After the ceremony, they returned to Adam's cabin, now their shared home where they'd decided to live, while transforming Florence's repaired house into a larger barn for their expanding operation. That night, as they stood together on the porch looking out at their combined lands, Adam wrapped his arms around his new wife. "When you showed up at my door that stormy night, soaking wet and in distress, I never imagined this outcome," he said, his chin resting on her head. Florence turned in his arms. "When you said I'd sleep safe in your cabin that night, I thought it was just neighborly kindness. I didn't know I'd found my home." "Not just a home," Adam corrected, kissing her forehead. "A future." By the following spring, their partnership had flourished in every way. The cattle operation was growing steadily, with the first calves from their new breeding program healthy and strong. The small orchard Florence had insisted on planting was showing promising signs, with young apple and cherry trees taking root. They worked side by side daily, Florence proving herself as capable with cattle as she was with accounts and planning. Adam found her insight invaluable, her different perspective often leading to innovative solutions to ranching challenges. In their personal life, the initial adjustment to marriage had given way to deep contentment. They complemented each other perfectly, Adam's quiet steadiness balancing Florence's more outspoken nature. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold, Florence took Adam's hand and placed it gently on her stomach. "Our partnership is about to expand again," she said softly. Adam's eyes widened in realization. "Are you certain?" Florence nodded, her face glowing. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday when I went into town. We'll welcome a new Cowley in the winter." Adam gathered her into his arms, his usual reserve giving way to unbridled joy. "I love you, Florence Cowley," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you," she replied, thinking of how a disaster had led to her greatest happiness. "Thank you for taking me in that stormy night." "Best decision I ever made," Adam said with conviction. As darkness fell over their land, they remained on the porch, talking of the future of the child they would raise, the ranch they would continue building together, and the life they had found in each other's arms. The collapsed roof that had seemed like such a catastrophe had been the beginning of their story, a story of two souls finding shelter in each other, building something stronger and more enduring than any house could ever be.